We're working on our MyMath Lesson 8, so it's Chapter 1, Lesson 8, and the essential question for today is still the same. How does the position of a digit in a number relate to its value? And today we're going to order whole numbers and decimals. So let's look at number 1. It says, the table shows the cost to build 3 National Football League stadiums. Order the costs of the stadiums from greatest to least. So there's one way, and that is to use place value. So it says step 1, line up the numbers by their decimal points. And you can see they've pulled this information from the table. There's 3 different football stadiums, and it's giving you the cost in millions of dollars to build them, and they've lined up the decimal points. Then you compare the digits in the greatest place. So we're looking here in the greatest place, which is the hundreds, and we've got a 3, a 4, and a 3. And so we know that 4 is greater than 3. So this one is going to be the greatest. That's going to be the greatest number. So we could put number 1 by it if you would like. And we've already used this one. So now we're just looking. These are 3 and 3, so we go to the next greatest place, which now we have in the tens, we have a 6 and a 5 left. So 6 is greater than 5. So 6 is greater than 5, and so now we know that this one is our number 2 place. So it has this extra line here, and it's actually an error, so you can cross that off. I remember this happening last year. So that's our options. We have number 1, number 2, and then this one we know would be the smallest, the least expensive way. There is another way to do it, and I don't like this way as much, but some people do. So it says to use a number line. So we're going to find dots on this number line. We're going to place dots on the number line to represent the approximate location of the decimals. So we have one up here for 364.2. So we've got 350, 375. Well, 364 is less than 375, but more than 350. So we could put it right about there. And then we have 430. So we could go, that's 400, 425, 450. It's more than 425 and less than 450. So we can put that here. We probably should label them too. 430.0, and this one was 364.2. And then our last one is 350, which we know is going to be right on that line, 350. And now since they're all in a row and plotted out on this number line, we can actually easily see that the greatest one is this one, 430, then 364, then 350. So the costs in millions of dollars from greatest to least are 430.0, got that one, 364.2, got that one, and finally 350.0. That's the cost of those football stadiums in order from greatest to least. Feel free to pause here if you need time to finish filling out that page. Okay, now we're going to go to example number 2. And it says, 4 trees in a state forest had heights of 22.65, 23.8, 22, and 23.25 feet. Order the heights from least to greatest. So we're going to go from the smallest to the largest. So our first step, and this step is always my first step when I'm comparing any numbers, is to line up the decimal point. And so you can see that they've rewritten these 22.65, then 23.8, 22, and 23.25. But they've also done this thing, and I wish they didn't do it for you, so I'm going to have you trace over it. They've done what's called annex a 0. And so this 23.8 is just listed as that, but they annexed a 0. Remember, I can write as many zeros to the right of these as I want, to the right of a decimal point. So if you wanted to, you could annex zeros like crazy and go on forever, but that would probably not help you too much in ordering them. They also annexed 2 zeros on this one because that 22 didn't even have a decimal point. It was 22 whole feet and there was nothing left over. So you can annex 2 zeros. That way it's easiest for you to line them up and compare. So remember, if you were writing this on your own, which sometimes I wish this book made you write more on your own, you would have to make sure that you're super duper neat here, because if you get these place values lined up incorrectly, then you're not going to compare the numbers right. Another good thing to use for this, you guys, is always your graph paper, right? Because your graph paper has those lines on it that are already drawn nice and straight, and then you can just fill in the numbers as they come, and you don't have to worry about the lines getting in your way or confusing you. You can just follow the lines of your graph paper. So as you can see, I pretended to have graph paper there and I wrote them out in that grid. Our next step is to compare the digits using place value. So we start always in the greatest place, and this is our tens, and they're all the same. So next we move to the next greatest place, and we have a 2, a 2, a 3, and a 3. So they want it in order from least to greatest. So we know that this one has a 2, and this one has a 2. So it says the least number is 2, and the greatest number is 3. So we're going to compare here. We're just looking at these two. We want to find the smallest. So we're going to go to the next place over, which is the tenths. We have a 6 and a 0. So which is smaller, a 6 or a 0? That's right, 0 is. So that is the smallest one of all of them. So the smallest is 22.00. And I recommend crossing it off when you're done so that you don't get confused and go back and rewrite it again. It also gets easier and easier to compare them when you're crossing them off because you're eliminating them from your group. So now we go back. If you forgot, that's okay. We go 2, 2, and 2, all the same in the tens, and then we go to our ones, and we have a 2, a 3, and a 3. Oh, 2 is definitely smaller than 3, so this whole number, remember that was the other one we were looking at, is going to be smaller. So 22.65 is our next number, and after we wrote it down, we can go ahead and cross it off so we don't have to compare it anymore. So we have 2 numbers left, and they both start with 23. So our tens digit is the same, our ones digit is the same. We go to the tenths. We have an 8 and a 2. Now remember, we're comparing least to greatest, so I want the smallest. So since 2 is smaller than 8, this whole number is the smaller. So 23.25. I can cross that off when I'm done. And then my last number is 23.80. This isn't especially hard, but it does require you to be really neat and to make sure you're checking the place value in order. So let's look at our guided practice. It says to order each set of numbers from least to greatest. We always want to reread the directions there because they'll try and trick you and change that back and forth from least to greatest and then greatest to least. So here's our numbers, and I'm going to go ahead and recommend that you get out your paper and get out your graph paper to use this. So I'm going to pause the video and ask you to get out your graph paper. It is in the back of your September journal. I must find mine. Okay, so now that you've got your graph paper, and I've got my graph paper as well, we are going to copy down these numbers, and we're going to use the lines of the graph paper to help us keep them in order. So we're just going to go through them one by one. 56.7. So I'm going to take up one whole square with my numbers. 56, and you could put the decimal point right on the line because it's not taking up a place in the place value. 56.7. I underlined it, so that means I wrote it down. I don't want to cross these out necessarily because sometimes we can write too hard and we haven't ordered them yet. Now we do the next one, 64.3. And the next one, 59.0 and 64.5. And I'm going to check and look to see if I need to annex any zeros to make them have the same number of places, and I don't need to, so I can leave it just as it is. Now that I have them all written out, and if you haven't written them all out yet, you may pause the video, but now that I have them all written out, I'm going to start to compare them. It wants from least to greatest, so I'm going to start always, no matter what I'm doing, in the biggest place. So here I have a 5, a 6, a 5, and a 6. We want the least, so we're going to start our looking with these ones. We can just kind of in our mind ignore these ones that start with 6 for the time being. I like to circle the ones I'm working with so I can help ignore the other ones better. Then I go to the next place value, which is the ones, and you're going to compare just the ones we've circled. So I have a 6 and a 9, a 6 and a 9, which is smaller. Remember, we're looking for least to greatest. The smaller is the 6, so this whole number is the smallest. So at this point, we're going to go back to our paper and we're going to write that number out. 56.7 is the first number. And I can put a comma after that number so I know that I've got more numbers coming. And then I'm going to just cross that one off. I'm done with that one. Now we already circled this one because we decided that 59 was smaller. This 5 is smaller than these two 6s. So we know that 59.0 is going to be our next biggest number. We're going from smallest to biggest. After I've written that, I can cross that out. And now I just have two numbers to compare. So I'm going to go back to my biggest place, and I've got a 6 and a 6. Okay, it's the same. I have to move to the next place smaller. This time in the ones, I've got a 4 and a 4. Oh, another tie. So I have to go further one place smaller to the tenths. And I have a 3 and a 5. So which one is smaller? Remember, we're going from smallest to greatest. 3 is smaller than 5. So that one is my smaller one, 64.3. And cross that off. And then my final one is 64.5. Now, if you weren't using your graph paper on this, you could mess yourself up just by the way you wrote it. That's why the graph paper is so important when we're comparing. All of my students who I've taught to use graph paper and line up their decimals, they don't tend to miss these problems. But the students who try to do it in their head, or the students who try to write it out but they don't line up their decimals, they tend to have a hard time. Even if you're not a neat writer, you have to be neat when you're trying to compare these decimals. So let's look at the next one, number 2. We're going to compare from least to greatest still these 4 numbers, which are in rainfall in inches. So we're going to write them out again on our graph paper. We've got 0.76. You'll see that I'm using 1 digit per square. I wrote that one. Now we've got 0.09, 0.63, and 0.24. They also all have the same number of digits, so we don't need to annex any zeros to the right of that decimal point. Okay, so now what we do is we find the greatest place value and we start to compare. We're looking for the smallest, the least. In the ones place, I have zeros all the way down. That's not going to help us compare. In the tenths place, I go there. I have a 7, a 0, a 6, and a 2. Well, let's think about this. What's the smallest? 2, 6, 0, or 7? It is 0. So this one is going to be our smallest, and we can write it on our paper, 0.09. And remember, if at any time I'm working too fast for you, you can pause the video and fill in your paper to catch up. After I've wrote that down, I can cross it off. Now I only have 3 to compare. So if you recall, all these were the same. Now here we are in the tenths. We have a 7, a 6, and a 2. Which is the least? That's right, it's a 2. So this is our next number. We can write 0.24. And then we're going to put another comma, and I can cross it off my list. 0.24. Now I have 2 numbers left. I have a 7 in the tenths and a 6 in the tenths. Which is the smallest? That's your 6 right there, 0.63. That whole number is smaller. You can cross it off, and when you have only 1 left, you know that it's the biggest at this point, and you can write it down. Again, if you need to pause the video there to catch up, please do that. And we're going to do number 3 together because this one is a little bit trickier. So the height of flowers in inches. We have 8.9. We have 8.59. We have 8.705 and 8.05. Now when we look at these, you'll notice that some of them, like this 8.705, it actually has a lot more digits. But what we can do here is we can annex those zeros. Because there's decimal points here, I can put as many zeros as I want after these numbers to fill in the spaces and make sure they're all the same digits. It's a little bit easier to compare. So I annexed zeros in all of those blank spaces to the right of the decimal after the last place. So now we compare. I look at my ones place, they're all 8s. All those are the same, so that's not going to help me at all. I go to my tenths place. I have a 9, a 5, a 7, and a 0. Which is the smallest? That's right, it's a 0. So I'm going to write that one as my smallest, 8.050. And then cross it off. Then you go back to your list and you compare again. Those were the same in the ones. We have a 9, a 5, and a 7. Which is smallest, a 9, a 5, or a 7? That's right, the 5. So that whole number, 8.590, is our next smallest decimal. I can cross it off. I only have 2 left. They both have 8s in the ones place. This one has a 9 in the tenths, and this one has a 7 in the tenths. Which is the smallest? That's right, 7. So this one becomes the next largest, and that means our biggest one is 8.9. Biggest one is 8.9. I'm going to have you guys skip number 4. Skip number 4. It's a freebie. You all got it. We're skipping number 4. And then I am going to have you go to the independent practice page. These particular problems, you guys, take a lot of work. They take a lot of time and a lot of work. And so we're just going to do a few of them to practice. We're going to do a few of them to practice. So I'm going to circle the ones I want you to do. So you can cross out number 5. Skip number 5. Another freebie. We're going to do number 6, though. We're also going to do number 8. And we're going to do number 10. These are the evens on the page. 6, 8, 10. And we'll even do 12 and 14. We're just doing the evens, not the odds. Remember, the evens end in 2, 4, 6, or 8, or 0. And we've got just our evens circled to do. So please get out your graph paper and follow along with our temperatures. You're going to line them up. I've run out of room on my graph paper, so I'm going to go back up to the top and use some more space up here. 106.3. That's a high temperature. If you have that, you can't go somewhere. You might be home sick. 99.8. Also just a little high. 101.1. Do you see how the decimal point is still lined up? I didn't scooch that 101 over. And 110.5. Now that temperature is extremely high, and I hope it is measuring like the heat outside and not someone's body. So let's look at this, you guys. We've got this missing place here. Now, can I add a 0 here? Can I annex a 0 there? Sure, it's a weird way to write 99, right? We don't really normally write 099, but because there's nothing there, it's a 0. There's nothing there. Nothing is the same as 0. So this question wants it from least to greatest. So which is the least? 1, 0, 1, or 1? Yep, it is obviously 0, so we're going to write that one in our book. So this 99.8, or even if you wanted to write it that way, 99.8, that is not wrong. That is the smallest, and then you can cross it off. Now we have 3 left to compare. We have a 1, a 1, a 1 in the hundreds place. Those are all the same. We go to the tens place. We have a 0, and a 1. Remember, we're looking for the smallest. So we have 2 zeros. They're tied. These guys are tied, so I like to circle them. Right now, remember, we're ignoring this bottom one. It's not part of our comparison. So we go to the next place value, to the ones. I have a 6 and a 1, which is the smallest. Oh, obviously the 1. So that's my next smallest, 101.1. Then I cross it off. And then I'm going to go back up to this one. I know this one's smaller because I circled it. I checked it. It's already been compared against this one. So 106.3. And that means our largest or greatest, highest temperature is 110.5. I'm going to have you guys continue on doing these, number 8, number 10, number 12, and number 14. And I want you to make sure you take a picture of this page so I can check your work and make sure you're understanding it. You do not have to do the back page. These ones are a little more time consuming than some of our others. This back page is a skip. You do not have to do the back page. So on this page, you're just going to do the evens. And then make sure you take that picture so I can see if you need any help. Thanks, you guys. Keep up the good work. You're learning a lot. Your brains are doing good.